In Hollywood, you're only ever as hot as your most recent film. Even if you have billion-dollar hits and successful franchises, you can find yourself in the crosshairs if you run afoul of the money men. That's why so many directors have been ruined just because of one flop. In this video, I want to take a look at those directors and the movies that ended them, either permanently or for long periods of time. Most often, the movies were critical and commercial flops, though for studios, only the latter is not permissible. A bad movie that makes money is the same as a good movie that makes money from the studio's perspective. But a bad movie that loses money, well, that's an issue. I take no joy in putting Tom Hooper on this list. The man directed 2008's John Adams miniseries, easily one of the best miniseries ever made, and perhaps one of the greatest intro themes in TV history. Hooper has had a long, fulfilling career to be sure, and he's won just about every major award there is to win for his contributions to the entertainment industry. He got started doing TV shows in his mid-20s before transitioning to making feature films in the mid-2000s. His first two films, 2004's Red Dust and 2009's The Damned United, didn't exactly set the world on fire commercially, though the latter did earn rave reviews. But 2010's The King's Speech was, undoubtedly, the movie that changed everything for Tom Hooper. The movie, which is about the future King George VI stammer and being thrust into the limelight, was a wild success, making $427 million on a $15 million budget, and it won multiple Academy Awards including Best Director for Hooper. It also got favorable reviews from organizations that try to shed light on stammering, such as the British Stammering Association, which said that it was a, quote, realistic depiction of the frustration and the fear of speaking faced by people who stammer on a daily basis, end quote. His follow-up was 2012's Les Miserables, which is based on the musical, which, in turn, is based on the masterpiece by Victor Hugo. The film adaptation had been stuck in development hell for years before Hooper was finally attached to it. He miraculously got it done, and in the process of doing so, had another critical and commercial success on his hands, though the reception wasn't as grand as it was for The King's Speech. That said, even after more than 10 years, it's still considered one of the better musicals of the 21st century, and I think introduced a lot of people to the fact that Wolverine is an incredibly capable singer. In 2015, he had The Danish Girl, which still made money, though not as much as his previous films. The film, which is about the first known recipients of gender-affirming surgery, much like his two previous movies, got multiple Academy Award nominations, as well as a Best Supporting Actress win for Alicia Vikander. And then there was Cats. Hooper again decided to direct a movie based on a musical, based on a book, but unlike the previous one, this would not work out in his favor. The film was criticized for its terrible CGI and direction. Variety wrote that it was a, quote, once-in-a-blue-moon embarrassment that mars the resumes of great actors and trips up the careers of promising newcomers, end quote. The design of the cats was called grotesque, and it was named as one of the worst films of the year, pretty much a 180-degree flip for Hooper. Worst of all, it was a box office bomb. The movie put him out of commission for several years, though he says that he has several projects in the works right now. Whether they make it to the screen remains to be seen. It also pains me to put Alex Proyas on this list more than pretty much everyone else, because the guy is a fantastic director. His first movie was an Australian film, Spirits of the Air, Gremlins of the Clouds, that got decent reviews. But it was 1994's The Crow, easily one of the finest revenge films ever made, that helped put him on the map. The movie was a critical and commercial success, and spawned a successful franchise. He followed that with 1998's Dark City, which got positive reviews, especially from Roger Ebert, who said that it was, quote, a great visionary achievement, a film so original and exciting, it stirred my imagination like Metropolis and 2001: A Space Odyssey, end quote, and called it the best film of 1998. Unfortunately, it didn't make any money at the box office. Unlike 2004's I, Robot, a commercial success that's also a genuinely fun film, and, I think, is a near classic at this point. At least for me, it's one of the more memorable films of the 2000s, and, like several of Proyas' films, has gotten better with age, not worse. Proyas has always made interesting films. Even 2009's Knowing, starring Nicolas Cage, is an interesting movie, if not as good as some of his former works. But then came 2016's Gods of Egypt. Now, as someone who actually enjoyed Gods of Egypt and saw it around 5 times in theaters, I obviously disagree with the negative reception that it got, and it's unfortunate that it only made $150 million on a $140 million budget, a total flop. That said, Lionsgate, who provided the funding, had around just $10 million in exposure, though I guess they probably paid a decent chunk for marketing. A lot of the criticism was about the all-white cast, which, sure, it's Egypt and maybe that wasn't a good idea. But, unlike other similar casting, at least Proyas and Lionsgate had the balls to apologize, a fact noted and praised. At the end of the day though, it's a fantasy movie. Still, Jordan Hoffman's 3-star review in The Guardian was most amusing. He wrote, quote, "This is ridiculous. This is offensive. This shouldn't be, and I'm not going to say otherwise if you can't bring yourself to buy a ticket for this movie. But if you are on the fence, you can always offset your karmic footprint with a donation to charity because this movie is a tremendous amount of fun," end quote. And that's the unfortunate thing about the reception. Gods of Egypt is a lot of fun and was well worth seeing in theaters. Alas, the only awards recognition that it got was Razzie nominations, and Proyas hasn't directed a feature since its release. He has done shorts since then, but I hope he's able to make a comeback feature soon. Otherwise, it's a waste of talent. John McTiernan is the director responsible for some of the greatest action and thriller movies ever made, and he's directed no fewer than 3 classics: Predator in 1987, Die Hard in 1988, and The Hunt for Red October in 1990. And from the studio's perspective, not only were the movies critically successful, but they were commercially successful. For several years, it was like John McTiernan could write his own checks. Even when he hit an inevitable snag, 1992's Medicine Man, he was able to turn it around with 1993's Last Action Hero, which eventually became a cult classic, and he made bank with 1995's Die Hard with a Vengeance, as well as 1999's The Thomas Crown Affair, despite the latter being an unnecessary remake of Norman Jewison's 1968 classic. McTiernan should have been on a continual upswing, but unfortunately, he was something of a moron. 2 events coincided that would help lead to the financial and personal ruin of John McTiernan. First, he had 3 flops: 1999's The 13th Warrior, 2002's Rollerball, and 2003's Basic. The former is one of the biggest flops of all time when adjusted for inflation, but it's what happened on Rollerball that ended McTiernan's career. In 2006, McTiernan would run into legal trouble for a wiretapping incident that occurred during Rollerball's production. In 2000, McTiernan hired private investigator Anthony Pellicano to wiretap 2 people, including his Rollerball co-producer Charles Roven. The 2 apparently disagreed about how the movie should turn out, but instead of dealing with it like an adult, McTiernan somehow thought that it would be a good idea to spy on his partner. Then, in 2006, McTiernan thought that it would be a good idea to perjure himself in an FBI investigation. The case was a stain on McTiernan's career, and after 2003's Basic, he could not land a directing job, first because his movies didn't make any money anymore, and second because of the FBI case. McTiernan kept appealing his case as much as he could, but would start a 12-month prison term in April of 2013. He served most of it in prison and the last month and change under house arrest. While in prison, he also filed for bankruptcy thanks to an invasion of privacy lawsuit from his ex-wife, IRS debts, legal bills, and more. McTiernan says that he plans to make several more movies, but considering he has no money and hasn't directed a film in 20 years, that seems unlikely. And worse, it was entirely self-inflicted by a director that should have just ridden off into the sunset. Carl Rinsch can't even be called a one-hit wonder because the only movie that he did was a critical and commercial flop. That was 2013's 47 Ronin, starring Keanu Reeves. It's wild that a short film he made, 2010's The Gift, got him a budget that went as high as $225 million. Rinsch got his start making commercials, as many directors do. This is a tried and true method for directors to break into the film industry. Ridley Scott, Michael Bay, David Fincher, and Zack Snyder all made commercials before getting their big breaks. Rinsch was, by all accounts, a solid commercial director. He was able to get into the room for meetings to direct movies like Prometheus, which Scott eventually decided to do himself, as well as a remake of Logan's Run, which didn't materialize at that time. Some people thrive under pressure. Rinsch did not. Eventually, he landed 47 Ronin. The movie, which was supposed to mix, quote, fantasy elements of the sword scene in the Lord of the Rings pics with gritty battle scenes akin to those in films such as Gladiator, unquote, saw Rinsch being removed from the editing and post-production of the film. That obviously did not help. The movie was a critical and commercial disaster, grossing just $152 million. He found himself unable to get another job directing a film, so decided to move into doing television instead. And this is where things got really wild. he and his wife developed a sci-fi passion project that Netflix landed for $61 million. They probably wish they hadn't, because things started to get pretty weird. In a 2023 article for the New York Times, John Carreyrou, who broke the Theranos story, wrote that Rinsch's onset behavior had become erratic, probably thanks to the drugs that he was taking. He would yell and curse at the crew, and it got so bad that his wife and family had to intervene to try to get him into rehab. Just as bad, he had no work to show for it and was spending cash like there was no tomorrow, and not spending on the TV show, no, spending on himself. Rinsch got Netflix to send him $11 million, ostensibly for the good of the show. Instead, he used it for his own good, using the money to purchase stock options that lost him millions in weeks. This guy was no Gordon Gekko. Then, seemingly, his mind broke. He told Netflix that he could map the coronavirus signal, whatever that meant. He told his wife that airplanes were organic intelligent forces. He said that he could predict volcanic eruptions and lightning strikes. It's really no wonder that she decided to divorce the guy. Eventually, Netflix said that enough was enough after he completed exactly 0 episodes. So where did the rest of the money go besides equities? Cryptocurrencies, which apparently netted him $23 million. He bought several Rolls Royces, a Ferrari, and a bunch of other stuff. Hilariously, he tried to sue Netflix for $14 million, but the judge ordered that he had paid them almost $8.8 million and hand over rights to the show. The man imploded himself in a spectacular fashion. If there ever was a director whose career should have been safe, it should have been Gore Verbinski. The guy hit it out of the park from the jump with 1997's Mouse Game, a black comedy that made more than $125 million at the box office. Not bad for somebody's first feature. He started and stopped multiple projects after that before landing on 2001's The Mexican, which made $148 million on a budget that was a third of that. Both paled in comparison to 2002's The Ring, his adaptation of 1998's Ring, the critically acclaimed masterwork from Hideo Nakata. Then he struck gold. He helped Disney start an enduring film franchise in Parts of the Caribbean, arguably the funnest films ever made, starting with The Curse of the Black Pearl. Then he delivered a billion-dollar movie in Dead Man's Chest and a near-billion-dollar movie in At World's End. Both of these also helped push CGI to the limit and, in Davy Jones, gave us a technical marvel. At this point, it was as though every movie that Gore Verbinski touched turned to gold. Most directors are lucky to get a couple of decent-sized hits, but this guy had multiple hits in a row. Over a 10-year period, 6 out of 7 films were wild successes, earning multiples of their budget. The only flop was 2005's The Weatherman, though it had a pretty small budget. After At World's End, Verbinski tried his hand at directing an animated feature, Rango, where he reunited with Johnny Depp, who voiced the chameleon. The movie didn't double its budget, but Paramount said that it was a success. They even established Paramount Animation after its release, so obviously it did something right, such as winning the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. But then came 2013's The Lone Ranger. Starring Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer as Tonto and the Lone Ranger, it was a catastrophic flop both commercially and critically. The movie ran into money issues when Bob Iger thought that the budget was too high, which led to Verbinski, Hammer, Depp, and producer Jerry Bruckheimer reducing their salary for back-end points that they would never see. The movie also had a troubled production history. According to Variety, quote, "The shoot itself was hit with delays caused by rain and snowstorms, wildfires, 70-mile-per-hour winds, 100-degree plus temperatures, an outbreak of chickenpox among the crew, and the death of a stuntman," end quote. That inspired a press frenzy, though I think that blaming the press, as some in the cast and crew did, is a cop-out for more uncomfortable issues that people don't want to deal with. It's more unfortunate as the movie isn't a train wreck, but a host of fun. I'm pretty sure that a decade from now, it's going to be a classic, and it'll have deserved every bit of it. What wasn't deserved is what it did to Verbinski's career. It ruined it. His next movie was 2016's A Cure for Wellness, which got mixed reviews and bombed on its $40 million budget. He's in the middle of a sci-fi film right now, and good luck, have fun, don't die, which I hope revitalizes his career. The guy directs fun movies, and we could all use a bit more fun. Christian Rivers got his start in the film business when he was just 17, which is when he linked up with Peter Jackson and storyboarded Braindead, something that he would do for many of Jackson's future films. For a long time, Rivers stayed behind the scenes. He was a visual effects supervisor on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, a sculptor and designer on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Splinter Unit director on the Hobbit trilogy. Over several decades, he held multiple jobs within the industry, often working very closely with Peter Jackson. In 2009, Jackson started development on adapting Mortal Engines, a neat film based on a novel that depicts roving cities fighting for resources. Christian Rivers was to direct it, with a way to providing the visual effects. It was a visually stunning movie, though it pretty much bombed critically and commercially. The movie made $84 million on a budget that was as high as $150 million. Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus for the movie reads, quote, "Mortal Engines has no shortage of eye-catching special effects, but lacks enough high-octane narrative fuel to give this futuristic fantasy sufficient cinematic combustion," end quote. Basically, everything from the score to the visuals to the design got praise, while the plot and narrative got steamrolled. The author of the book, Philip Reeve, enjoyed it and said that, quote, "Christian Rivers has done a fantastic job," end quote. But I think part of the issue may have been that the movie was just too big for a first-time director. It also seems as though Rivers was given the leeway to direct as he saw fit, and didn't necessarily have someone with the expertise of, say, Peter Jackson looking over his shoulder. Where Rivers goes from here is up in the air, perhaps literally if he's able to direct The Dam Busters, a remake of the 1955 classic about Operation Chastise during World War II, which was a mission that attacked German dams. The movie's been stuck in development hell for almost 20 years at this point though, so it's more of a wait and see kind of thing. Troy Duffy is his own worst enemy when it comes to making movies. He's directed 2 movies, The Boondock Saints and The Boondock Saints 2, All Saints Day, the former in 1999 and the latter in 2009. Neither made money at the box office. The former was actually catastrophic. It made just $30,471 on a $6 million budget, while the latter made $10.6 million on an $8 million budget. Both of them got castigated by critics, but honestly, I find them both to be fun watches. The first Boondock Saints, especially, is one of my favorite action movies of all time, and Rocco's reaction in the hotel is one of the funniest scenes in any movie ever. So yes, the reviews and box office totals were problems. But then there was Troy Duffy, who was as hard to work with as Carl Rinsch. Even after securing a lucrative deal with Miramax that included Harvey Weinstein buying him a bar, Duffy did everything in his power to sabotage himself. As a documentary about Duffy, Overnight, showed, fame changed him. He became egotistical and mean even to his own friends and family. He would disparage actors and producers, threaten his own agency when things were moving slowly, and was an all-around terrible person. Miramax eventually decided to drop Duffy altogether and put the film in turnaround. Duffy, who thought highly of himself, was a nobody now. No one would return his calls and no one wanted to work with him, though that's pretty understandable. Even when he got the financing necessary, no distributor wanted to pick it up, which explains the $30,471 box office. The Boondock Saints would become a huge hit on home video, but Duffy would not see a cent of that because, in his contract with Franchise Pictures, he gave away the TV, home video, and foreign rights. The bar closed down because he had run through all the money he made, and he was on the outs of the industry. A third Boondock Saints film is in the works, but Duffy isn't attached to direct this time. Instead, he wants to continue the story in a series of books. How well that turns out is anybody's guess. Dominic Sena's last film was 2011's Season of the Witch, which was something of a twofer. Not only did the movie end Sena's career, but it also helped put Nicolas Cage on the path to filmic purgatory for years. Granted, Nick Cage kind of brought it upon himself with his inveterate spending, but a series of critical and commercial flops did help end his career. Season of the Witch, unlike several other films here, did not flop at the box office, but it did continue an issue that Sena had, which was making movies that people just did not seem to enjoy. Sena got his start doing music videos in the 1980s, something that Michael Bay, Zack Snyder, and David Fincher all had experience with as well. His first directorial feature was 1993's California, which starred Brad Pitt. The movie had an $8.5 million budget and grossed just $2.4 million, but it did get some solid reviews from people like Roger Ebert. But when the budget is that small, studios will give you another chance. No one really expects indie movies to make money after all. His second feature was Gone in 60 Seconds, his first time working with Nick Cage. He plays a guy that needs to steal 50 cars in order to save his brother's life. The reviews weren't that great, but it did make $237 million on a budget that was only as high as $103 million. It's a fun romp of a movie, though I'm not sure I would rewatch it over, say, any of the Fast and Furious movies. The bad reviews were a recurring feature for Sena's next 3 films. First, there was Swordfish in 2001, which made $147 million on a $102 million budget, meaning it probably lost money. The New York Times called it dumb and incoherent, and critics weren't fans of Halle Berry's topless scene, which they said felt forced. 2009's Whiteout was a critical and commercial disaster that sees Kate Beckinsale being pursued in an Antarctic base. Then came 2011's Season of the Witch. It made $91.6 million on a $40 million budget, so it might not have lost money, but unfortunately, it kept Sena's streak of subpar reviews going strong. Rotten Tomatoes consensus was a bit harsh, saying, quote, "Slow, cheap-looking, and dull, Season of the Witch fails even as unintentional comedy," end quote. It seemingly had no redeemable qualities, nor was it able to redeem Sena's career. For whatever reason, he completely stopped making movies after this point, and it doesn't look as though he has anything lined up for the future. Making a lasting career in Hollywood requires that one be easy to work with, or, lacking that, be supremely competent at making great movies that either win awards or make bank. The latter, from the studio's perspective, is the most important thing. A film can be bad, but if it's a massive flop that loses studios tens, or worse, hundreds of millions of dollars, it'll sour them on a particular director very quickly, even if that director has delivered countless times before. That said, plenty of directors are able to make a comeback from a terrible film or flop. I hope that many of these directors are able to do that as well.